On the evening of April 3rd, 2008, the peaceful suburb of Nashville was shattered by the discovery of a gruesome murder. What once seemed like the picture-perfect life of a housewife spiraled into darkness, entangled in an affair that would end in bloodshed. The investigation revealed deep layers of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession, ultimately tearing a family apart. Elena Rodriguez, a 34-year-old mother of two, had long been admired by her neighbors as the embodiment of the perfect wife and mother. She was known for her kindness, her unwavering commitment to her children, and her seemingly blissful marriage to Miguel Rodriguez, a hard-working construction foreman. Their home was modest yet warm, nestled in a quiet Nashville suburb, a place where everything appeared serene. On the surface, Elena's life seemed ideal. A loving husband, beautiful children, a comfortable home, everything she had ever dreamed of. But beneath the surface, darkness loomed. Miguel, 36, had been married to Elena for over a decade. He was a man of few words but solid dedication. He worked long hours to provide for his family, spending endless days at construction sites, returning home late in the evening, too exhausted to notice the growing distance between him and his wife. His dedication to his work was born from love, but it left little room for intimacy or connection. He believed that his hard work was the best way to show his love, unaware that Elena was feeling increasingly isolated. Elena's loneliness grew quietly, creeping into the corners of her once happy home. Miguel's long absences, though intended to provide a better life, only deepened the void between them. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and passion, had become brief exchanges about the children, the bills, or what needed fixing around the house. The emotional connection that had once bound them together had begun to unravel, thread by thread. But amid this growing distance, another figure entered Elena's life: David Cortez. David, the husband of Elena's cousin, Victoria, was everything Miguel was not. Charming, outgoing, and always quick with a flirtatious smile, David knew how to make people feel noticed. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for his easy charm and good looks, perhaps a bit too charming, some would say, but Elena had always brushed it off. He was family, after all. She never imagined that their relationship would go beyond casual flirtation. But as Miguel spent more time at work, leaving her alone to fill the empty hours, Elena began to crave the attention that David freely offered. What started as innocent comments about her beauty, her energy soon became something deeper. David's eyes lingered a little too long, his words became more suggestive. And slowly, Elena, starved for affection, found herself drawn to him. At first, she resisted. The guilt gnawed at her, reminding her of her marriage, her children, her responsibilities. But the more time she spent with David, the more intoxicating his attention became. He filled the emotional void that Miguel, despite his best efforts, had left wide open. David made her feel seen, desired, and alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. What began as playful flirtation turned into secret rendezvous, stolen moments of passion that brought excitement back into Elena's life, but also a deepening sense of dread. Elena's cousin, Victoria, was unaware of the storm brewing in her own home. She and Elena had always been close, like sisters, sharing their lives and secrets. But this secret, this betrayal, was something Elena kept hidden. The guilt weighed on her like a heavy cloak, and every time she saw Victoria or Miguel, it became harder to bear. The more David and Elena's affair progressed, the more fragile her once perfect life became. As the affair continued, Elena found herself trapped between two worlds. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, that it would destroy her family if the truth ever came out, but she couldn't stop. David's charm had become an addiction, pulling her further away from the life she had built with Miguel. And David. He was enjoying the affair, perhaps more for the thrill than for any deep emotional connection. He was playing with fire, caught in a game that gave him a sense of power, until Elena began to change. The affair that had once been thrilling started to weigh heavily on her. What had once been passion turned into paranoia. Elena couldn't shake the fear of being caught. She grew restless, racked with guilt, and began questioning everything. One evening, as they met in secret, Elena finally broke down. The guilt was unbearable, and the paranoia that someone would discover their affair had become too much for her. She told David that it had to end, that they couldn't keep living this lie. But David didn't want to let go. He tried to reassure her, telling her they could keep it hidden if they were just careful. But Elena was past the point of rationalizing. She was ready to end the affair once and for all. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. Voices were raised, accusations flew. David, growing increasingly frustrated, refused to accept her decision. But Elena, determined to free herself from the nightmare she had created, stood her ground. And then, in a moment of blind panic, she threatened to tell Victoria, her cousin, his wife, if he didn't leave her alone. That was when everything spiraled out of control. In a fit of rage, David grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, the same kitchen where they had shared stolen moments together. Before he knew it, Elena was lying on the floor, blood pooling around her. The knife slipped from his hand, the horror of what he had done sinking in. Panic overtook him as he fled the scene, the weight of the murder pressing down on him with every step he took. It started innocently enough. At family gatherings, David Cortez would make Elena laugh with his easy charm and sharp wit, engaging her in conversations while Victoria tended to the children. He seemed genuinely interested in what Elena had to say, something that Miguel hadn't shown in years. The attention was subtle at first, just enough to make Elena feel noticed again. What began as harmless banter slowly deepened into something far more dangerous. By late 2007, Elena and David had crossed a line they couldn't return from, embarking on an affair that was as thrilling as it was reckless. Their connection was electric, built on stolen glances and whispered conversations, and before long it evolved into secret meetings. They were careful, planning their rendezvous with precision, always ensuring no one would suspect a thing. The danger of being caught only fueled the fire between them. For the first time in years, Elena felt alive again, desired, wanted in a way that Miguel's long work hours and growing distance had failed to provide. David filled a void she hadn't even fully understood she had, but their affair was a time bomb waiting to explode. Everything came crashing down on April 3, 2008. That afternoon, Miguel Rodriguez returned home earlier than usual from work, stepping into a scene he never imagined would shatter his world. Elena's lifeless body lay in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor, a single stab wound piercing her chest. The shock and horror of the sight immobilized him before he frantically dialed 911, his voice trembling with confusion and terror. The Nashville Police Department arrived at the Rodriguez home within the hour, led by Detective Juan Garcia, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous approach. The crime scene told a chilling story, but it wasn't clear-cut. While it initially appeared to be a burglary gone wrong, the lack of forced entry and the surgical precision of the killing suggested something far more intimate. In the days that followed, Detective Garcia methodically pieced together what had happened, starting with interviews of those closest to Elena. Miguel was the first to sit across from Garcia in the dimly lit interrogation room. His grief was raw, his eyes bloodshot from days of sleepless agony. He insisted that he and Elena had no enemies, no one who would wish her harm. When Garcia asked about their marriage, Miguel admitted that things hadn't been perfect lately. Elena had grown distant in recent months, but he had blamed it on the stress of running the household while he worked long hours. Miguel's alibi for the day of the murder was solid. His colleagues confirmed he had been at the construction site from dawn until the moment he left for home. With Miguel seemingly ruled out, Garcia turned his attention to Elena's extended family, starting with her cousin Victoria and her husband, David Cortez. The Cortez home was quiet when Garcia arrived to question them, the atmosphere heavy with grief. Victoria was a wreck, her hands shaking as she clutched at David's for comfort. She spoke about her relationship with Elena, how they had been more like sisters than cousins, inseparable for years. But recently, something had changed in Elena. She had withdrawn, becoming more distant and guarded, though Victoria never pressed her on why. David, by contrast, was calm, almost too calm. He spoke of Elena's death with shock but little emotion, answering Garcia's questions with unnerving composure. When asked about his whereabouts on the day of the murder, David claimed he had been at a business meeting, providing names of those who could vouch for him. Detective Garcia left the Cortez home that day with a nagging feeling that there was more to the story. Victoria's description of Elena's recent behavior suggested that something had been troubling her for a while, and David's stoic demeanor felt wrong. Garcia decided to dig deeper into their lives, particularly David's. A break came a few days later, on April 8th, when a routine examination of Elena's phone records turned up a series of cryptic text messages. The messages, though vague, were undeniably intimate in tone. They spoke of secret meetings and shared desires, pointing to an affair that no one had known about. The number associated with the messages was saved under a pseudonym, but it didn't take long for Garcia's team to trace it back to David Cortez. The discovery was explosive. David, the charming, composed husband of Elena's cousin, had been having an affair with Elena for nearly a year. Their relationship had been a carefully hidden secret, shielded from both their spouses and the rest of the family. The coded texts, the secret rendezvous, they painted a picture of a love affair filled with passion and danger, but also deceit and lies. Detective Garcia wasted no time bringing David in for another round of questioning. This time, armed with the text messages, Garcia confronted David about the affair. David's calm facade cracked, his composure slipping as the weight of the evidence bore down on him. David tried to play it off at first, claiming the messages were harmless flirtation, nothing more. But Garcia wasn't buying it. The texts told a different story, one of passion, secrecy, and a relationship that had gone far beyond innocent flirtation. Faced with the mounting evidence, David finally broke, admitting to the affair but denying any involvement in Elena's murder. He claimed that their relationship, though intense, had never turned violent, and that on the day of the murder, he had been in a business meeting as he'd previously stated. But Garcia knew better. The affair had been a powder keg, and Elena's decision to end it may have been the spark that ignited the violence. As the investigation continued, Garcia and his team worked to piece together the final moments of Elena's life. They learned that Elena had been growing increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to her death, afraid that someone might discover the affair. And in a moment of desperation, she had tried to break things off with David for good. The confrontation had turned deadly. David, unable to let go, had snapped. The affair that had once made Elena feel alive ended with her losing her life. Initially, David denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the messages were harmless and that there was nothing more to them. However, as Garcia pressed him with more details, David's composure began to crack. The weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore, and under pressure, David finally admitted to the affair. He confessed that their relationship had been intense and filled with passion, but he insisted that it was nothing more than a fling. David claimed that he had never intended to leave Victoria and that he had ended the relationship with Elena just weeks before her death. He portrayed the affair as a mistake, something that had spiraled out of control, but according to him, was now in the past. With this new information, Garcia turned his attention to Victoria. When she was questioned, Victoria broke down. She admitted that she had suspected David of infidelity for some time, but she had never imagined that it could involve her own cousin. Victoria revealed that she had noticed changes in David's behavior, his frequent absences, his secretive phone calls, but she had never confronted him directly. Despite her suspicions, Victoria had believed David's reassurances until Garcia presented her with the truth. The revelation devastated her, but she had no further information that directly implicated David in Elena's murder. Her world was shattered by the betrayal, but she was as much in the dark about the murder as the investigators had been. David was adamant and kept on insisting he had nothing to do with the murder, but everyone knew the truth. What happened was that on the morning of April 3, 2008, when Miguel left for work as usual, unaware that his world was about to come crashing down, Elena and David had planned to meet that day. David told Victoria he had a meeting with a client, and Elena sent the children to school, eagerly awaiting David's arrival. She made sure the house was spotless, her appearance perfect, everything just right for their rendezvous. David arrived at the Rodriguez home around noon. Elena greeted him at the door, and they quickly found themselves in each other's arms. But something happened while they made love. Elena moaned her husband's name, and this changed everything because the mood was ruined and she suddenly began to feel guilty. Clearly, she still loved her husband. What was she even doing, she asked herself. There was a tension in the air, a sense of urgency that neither of them could quite place. Perhaps it was the mounting guilt or the growing fear of being discovered, but their usual passion was tinged with something darker. They argued briefly. Elena was becoming increasingly paranoid about their affair being exposed, and she was no longer comfortable and wanted to end it, while David insisted that they could continue as long as they were careful. The argument quickly escalated, fueled by jealousy, frustration, and the pressure of their secret. That was when Elena threatened to tell his wife, her cousin, if he didn't agree to leave her alone. In a moment of blind rage, David grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. What happened next was a blur. Before either of them realized it, Elena was on the floor, blood pooling around her as the knife fell from David's hand. Panicked, David fled the scene, picking up the knife. He didn't bother to wipe it down, too consumed by fear to think clearly. He ran to his car, his mind racing with the realization of what he had done. Elena, the woman he had claimed to love, was now lying dead in her own kitchen, the life drained from her body. Back to the case. Following these revelations, the investigation took on a new sense of urgency. Detective Garcia and his team worked to gather more evidence that could link David Cortez to the murder. On April 12, 2008, they made a breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a store near the Rodriguez residence was reviewed, and it showed David Cortez in the vicinity on the day of the murder. The footage contradicted David's earlier statement that he had been at a business meeting during that time. When Garcia investigated further, he discovered that the meeting David claimed to attend had been cancelled, unraveling David's alibi. In addition to the surveillance footage, forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed a partial fingerprint on the back door of the Rodriguez house. The fingerprint was matched to David, but when questioned, David claimed that it must have been left during a previous visit to the house. Garcia was skeptical of this explanation, especially considering the growing pile of evidence against David. By April 15, 2008, Detective Garcia had gathered enough evidence to move forward. The surveillance footage, the fingerprint, the unraveling of David's alibi, and the motive provided by the affair painted a damning picture. Garcia obtained a warrant for David Cortez's arrest. That afternoon, David was taken into custody without incident and charged with the murder of Elena Rodriguez. The arrest sent fear through both families and the entire community. But the affair, which had been carefully hidden for nearly a year, was now exposed, and the consequences were devastating. David's actions had not only taken Elena's life, but had also destroyed his own marriage and shattered the trust between two families. As David sat in his cell awaiting trial, the reality of his actions began to sink in. What had started as a secret affair had spiraled into a deadly confrontation, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. As the case prepared to go to trial, the prosecution built a solid case against David Cortez. They painted him as a man who couldn't handle the pressure of his double life and chose murder to protect his secrets. The defense, however, argued that there was no concrete proof that David had killed Elena and suggested that someone else with knowledge of the affair could have framed him. On May 5, 2008, the trial of David Cortez began, drawing widespread attention from both the media and the community. The courtroom was packed with people eager to see how the case would unfold. Reporters lined the hallways, and the trial became a topic of daily conversation in Nashville, Tennessee. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out their case against David. They presented a detailed timeline of events, supported by a mountain of evidence. The text messages between Elena and David were a key part of the prosecution's argument, clearly showing the affair and the escalating tension between the two. These messages painted a picture of a relationship that had become increasingly volatile in the weeks leading up to Elena's death. Surveillance footage was shown next, capturing David near the Rodriguez home on the day of the murder. This evidence directly contradicted David's claim that he had been at a business meeting, which the prosecution pointed out had been cancelled. The footage placed David at the scene when he claimed to be elsewhere, casting serious doubt on his credibility. The prosecution also presented forensic evidence, including the partial fingerprint found on the back door of the Rodriguez house. The fingerprint matched David's, placing him at the scene in a way that could not be explained away as a previous visit. This physical evidence was critical in linking David directly to the crime. Witnesses were called to the stand to testify about the deteriorating relationships between the two couples. Neighbors and friends described how Elena and Miguel had grown distant and how David's behavior had changed as he became more secretive and withdrawn. These testimonies helped establish a motive, suggesting that David was under immense pressure as his affair with Elena began to unravel. Miguel Rodriguez's testimony was one of the most emotional moments of the trial. He recounted the day he found his wife's body, his voice heavy with grief and disbelief. He spoke of his shock not only at her death, but also at discovering her affair with David. Miguel's testimony added a personal and heartbreaking dimension to the case, reminding everyone of the real human cost of the crime. Victoria Cortez also took the stand. Her testimony was a mix of betrayal and sorrow. She described how she had always trusted David, but had suspected something was wrong in the months leading up to Elena's death. Victoria spoke about her confrontation with David after his arrest, where the full extent of his lies became clear. She explained how their marriage, once strong, had crumbled under the weight of his deceit. Victoria's pain was palpable as she recounted how David's actions had shattered their lives. Throughout the trial, the prosecution argued that David Cortez had acted out of desperation. Faced with the threat of Elena exposing their affair and destroying his marriage, David chose to silence her permanently. The evidence, both physical and testimonial, painted a picture of a man who had been pushed to the edge and made a deadly decision to protect his secrets. As the trial progressed, the jury listened intently, aware that they were deciding the fate of a man who had torn two families apart. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case against David was strong. The community watched and waited, knowing that the outcome of this trial would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. David Cortez was found guilty of second-degree murder. The evidence, though circumstantial in some areas, was strong enough to convince the jury of his guilt. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In the wake of the trial, Victoria filed for divorce from David, leaving behind the life they had built together. She moved away from Nashville, seeking to start anew away from the painful memories. Miguel Rodriguez, devastated by the loss of his wife and the bitter betrayal, chose to remain in the house where his life had unraveled. Every room echoed with memories of a family that once was, now fractured beyond repair. The neighborhood that once bustled with friendly gatherings and shared laughter became a shadow of its former self, darkened by the whispers of what had transpired. The affair and the murder were all anyone could talk about, a story that hung in the air long after the trial, a chilling reminder of how easily deception could spiral into tragedy. Elena Rodriguez's death wasn't just the loss of a wife and mother, it was a lesson in how hidden desires and lies could destroy lives. But if you thought this story was intense, it's only the beginning. There's another tale, even more shocking, a housewife's secret affair with her neighbor's son that ends in death, unraveling a new level of family and neighborhood drama. Stay tuned and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, obsession, and the deadly consequences of keeping secrets.